In this video, I'm going to demonstrate the reciprocal method of cost allocation using exercise 1134. So I have two service departments. I have maintenance and personnel. The direct cost for maintenance is $5,000. The direct cost for personnel is $12,000. Ultimately, we want to allocate this cost to our operating departments, printing and developing. But with our reciprocal method, we first acknowledge that a portion of the service department work is done for each other. So we want to acknowledge that before we move on to allocating the cost to printing and developing. I will also note that machine hours are allocated maintenance is allocated according to machine hours, and we list the amount of machine hours dedicated to those other departments. And personnel is allocated according to labor hours. And again, we acknowledge in our second row here the amount of personnel labor hours that were performed for the other departments. I think the hardest part is the starting off point for this. And once you get what we call the reciprocal equations and get those created, I think it gets a bit easier from here. It doesn't matter if I start with maintenance and personnel. I simply term, to be somewhat consistent with the book, I simply term maintenance to be variable S1. And that just, I think, stands for Service Department 1. I could have called Personnel Service Department 1. That's not important. But I said the maintenance related service cost is going to include the 5,000 direct costs that's listed here in our table, plus a portion of what I term S2, and that simply is just personnel, a portion of the personnel cost. How did I get that this is a sixth of it? I simply took a look at what are the personnel labor hours that are dedicated to maintenance, that's 500 hours, relative to the total hours allocated to any department, and that is 500 plus 500 plus 2,000, so that's a total of 3,000 hours in total. 500 divided by 3,000 is 1/6. Next, I built a formula for personnel. And again, I just haphazardly called it S2, Service Department 2. And I said its direct costs are 12,000 plus a portion of S1. Again, what I term maintenance. Where did I get 1/5? I took a look at the hours of maintenance machine hours to personnel relative to everybody else. It's 1,000 divided by 1,000 plus 1,000 plus 3,000. That's 5,000 in total. So 1,000 divided by 5,000 is 1/5 of, again, the maintenance related costs. I took one formula and laid it into the next. And again, it doesn't matter which order that I go through this. I started with personnel and again took the formula 12,000 plus 1/5 of maintenance. And again, just took the formula and supplemented that for my equation. 5,000 plus 1/6 of S2, and just working through this, personnel is 12,000 plus 1/5 times 5,000 is 1,000 plus 1/5 times 1/6 is 1/30. That's a very small fraction, yes, of, again, the personnel cost. Now, I'm not going to work through all the algebra because I know as accounting and finance students, you likely can do that on your own, and also to keep the video as brief as possible. But once I solve for personnel, I get that the total service department cost is $13,448. Again, acknowledging 12,000 direct costs and also a portion of maintenance. Now that I know that personnel in total is $13,448, again, I can just replace that in my maintenance equation, which was 5,000 plus 1/6 of personnel. Again, personnel in total is $13,448. So total maintenance related service costs, including a portion of the reciprocal cost from personnel, must be $7,241. That's a lot of work. That's just our starting point. It goes pretty quick from here. Again, in my table, I'm just starting out with the maintenance direct cost was 5,000. Personnel direct cost is 12,000. But again, I want to acknowledge the work done for each other. If personnel in total was 13,448 and the direct cost is 12,000, then maintenance of 1,448 must have been allocated to personnel. If the total maintenance cost is $7,241 and its direct cost is $5,000, then we must have allocated $2,241 from personnel to maintenance. So I'm just acknowledging that here. And again, if you total this up, you can see then that the direct cost of maintenance is $5,000, the allocation from personnel is $2,241, and that totals up to our total maintenance service cost of $7,241. Personnel, direct cost of $12,000 plus the amount allocated for maintenance of $1,448, again gets us to a total service related cost of personnel, including the allocation for maintenance, of $13,448. Now I'm again to keep the video as short as possible, I'm just going to prove out how to allocate personnel to all departments. Now, we already backed into the fact that we must have allocated $2,241 of personnel to maintenance. We just proved that out earlier, but I can go about this a different way with the formulas. I can say, okay, what amount of personnel cost is allocated to maintenance? Again, how is personnel allocated? It's allocated according to labor hours. 500 personnel labor hours are allocated to maintenance, divided by 500 plus 500 plus 2,000 is 3,000 in total. So again, that's going to be my 1/6 times 13,448 in total. Keep in mind, I'm not multiplying it times 12,000 because that would not acknowledge the amount that also came from the maintenance department. I'm listing the total of 13,448. And then I prove another direction that $2,241 of personnel would get allocated to maintenance. Again, I backed into it another way too. I can also indicate that the amount of personnel costs allocated to printing is also $2,241. Now, I could have gone the long route through proving it out this way like I did for maintenance, but I just said, well, if 500 labor hours of personnel are allocated to maintenance and the exact same amount, 500 labor hours, is allocated to printing, if the personnel cost allocated to maintenance is $2,241, then printing must have been the same $2,241. So I just did a little shortcut here. Developing, I can't do that. So again, I could take the total cost and subtract out what I've allocated so far, but I'm just going to prove it out with my equation. How many labor hours per personnel are allocated to developing? That's 2,000 divided by the 3,000 in total. So that's a significant portion of my personnel is allocated to developing, times the 13,448. That's the important part here, is we want to include the direct cost plus the portion allocated for maintenance, equals $8,966 of my personnel cost is going to get allocated to developing. When I look at this, again, 2,241 allocated to both maintenance and personnel, 8,966 allocated to developing. That's a total of the $13,448, and it includes the 12,000 of direct costs plus the allocation of $1,448 for maintenance. Again, to keep the video brief and give you an opportunity on your own, I'm not going to demonstrate the maintenance allocation, but hopefully this gives you a good start.